She thought she finally won him, but she had no idea she was already losing everything. Behind his love was a secret empire she was never meant to see. Every smile was a lie, every moment was carefully controlled. And when the truth finally came out, it destroyed everything she believed in. This is not just a love story, it's the story of a silent betrayal that changed everything. The rain had a way of making everything in the city look softer than it really was. Glass windows blurred into silver reflections, headlights stretched across wet roads like broken memories, and somewhere inside a high-rise apartment overlooking the skyline, a girl stood watching it all fall apart without even realizing it yet. Her name was Elena Carter, and tonight, she believed she had finally won. Not in a loud, dramatic way, not with celebration or victory speeches, but in that quiet, dangerous way that only heartbreak and obsession can create. The kind where you convince yourself that someone finally belongs to you, even when they don't. Behind her, the apartment was warm. Too warm. The kind of warmth that felt artificial, like it was hiding something underneath. A man's coat hung over the chair. A half-finished glass of whiskey sat on the table. And from the bedroom came the faint sound of running water. He was there. That alone made Elena smile. For 3 years, she had waited for this version of reality. 3 years of late-night calls that ended too quickly. 3 years of excuses. 3 years of watching him belong everywhere except with her. But tonight was different. Tonight, Damien Cole had come back on his own. Or so she thought. Elena walked slowly toward the bedroom door, her fingers brushing the cold wooden frame. Her reflection in the mirror beside it looked almost unrecognizable. Her dark hair fell perfectly over her shoulders, her makeup flawless, her expression carefully controlled. She had learned how to become unforgettable. Because men like Damien didn't fall for love. They fell for control. And Elena had finally learned how to play that game. Inside the bathroom, the water stopped. Silence followed. Then the door opened. Damien stepped out, steam trailing behind him like smoke from a secret he never fully confessed. His hair was damp, his shirt half-buttoned, his presence filling the room in a way that always made Elena forget how to breathe properly. He looked at her, not warmly, not coldly either, just carefully, as if she was a decision he hadn't fully justified yet. "You're still here," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena smiled. "You told me to stay." A pause. That small silence between them carried years of unsaid things. Damien walked past her, grabbing his watch from the table. His movements were calm, controlled, the kind of control that made people around him feel like they were always slightly out of place. "I didn't think you would," he replied. Elena stepped closer. "I always do what you don't expect." That made him stop. For the first time, something flickered in his expression, not emotion exactly, but awareness. Like he was realizing a pattern he hadn't paid attention to before. Elena noticed everything. She always did. That was her strength. And her curse. "I heard about the merger," she said softly. Damien didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tightened his cufflinks, gaze fixed downward. The silence stretched again, heavier this time. "You always hear things," he finally said. "I hear everything about you." That was not a confession. It was a warning. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Inside, something colder was forming. Damien finally turned to her. His eyes were sharp now, fully awake. "Elena," he said, slower this time. "Don't turn this into something it's not." Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes did, because she knew exactly what he meant. To him, she was never supposed to become something. Just a moment, a distraction, a line he crossed and then erased. But Elena was not built to be erased. She took another step closer. "What is it then, Damien?" He exhaled, like she was exhausting him without even trying. "You're emotional tonight." "I'm honest tonight." That landed differently. Even he felt it. For a second, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the walls were listening. Then Damien walked past her again, grabbing his coat. "I have a meeting early tomorrow," he said. Of course he did. He always did. There was always another meeting. Another deal. Another reason he couldn't stay. Elena watched him carefully, her voice softer now. "You used to stay longer." That sentence changed the atmosphere instantly. Damien paused near the door, not fully turning back, just enough to acknowledge it. That was before things got complicated. Elena felt something tighten in her chest. Or before I stopped pretending I didn't matter, she asked. A beat. Then Damien finally looked at her fully. And what she saw in his eyes was worse than rejection. It was detachment. You matter, he said calmly. Just not in the way you think. That sentence should have broken her. It would have broken anyone else. But Elena didn't break. She absorbed it, stored it, and smiled again. Because she had learned something important about men like Damien Cole. They never understood what they were building until it collapsed on them. And Elena had already started building something of her own. Damien opened the door. Cold air rushed in from the hallway, breaking the illusion of warmth inside the apartment. Before stepping out, he glanced back once. Just once. And in that single moment, Elena saw it. Not love, not regret, but something far more dangerous. Underestimation. And that was the moment everything began. Because Elena Carter wasn't the girl he was leaving behind. She was a storm he had already invited inside. The night after Damien left, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like reality itself had stopped mid-breath and was waiting for something to continue. Elena stood in the same spot near the doorway for a long time, long after his footsteps had disappeared into the corridor, long after the elevator doors had closed, long after the city outside had swallowed him again. The rain had stopped, but the glass windows still carried streaks of water that distorted the skyline into broken shapes, as if the world outside was refusing to stay clear for her. She slowly walked back inside, her heels silent against the marble floor, and picked up the glass he had left on the table. There was still a faint trace of whiskey at the bottom, warm against the cold air of the room, and she stared at it as if it could explain him better than his words ever did. Elena had never been the kind of woman who accepted uncertainty. Even as a child, she remembered needing answers for everything. Why people left, why promises changed, why love always seemed temporary in the mouths of those who claimed it was forever. Her father had been the first lesson in that education. A man who once filled their small house with laughter, who once lifted her onto his shoulders and promised she would never be alone, had disappeared one winter morning without even saying goodbye. Her mother never spoke of him again, but Elena remembered the silence he left behind more than anything he ever said. That silence had grown inside her over the years, shaping her into someone who needed control the way others needed air. And Damien Cole, with all his distance and unpredictability, had become the one thing she couldn't fully understand, which meant he had become the one thing she couldn't let go. The next morning, the city woke up loud and indifferent, as if nothing in the world had shifted overnight except Elena herself. She sat in front of her laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tired eyes, scrolling through reports, business updates, and financial news about Damien's company. He was always moving ahead, always expanding, always building something bigger than himself. Cole Enterprises was not just a company, it was an empire of influence, silence, and carefully hidden deals. And Damien was its center, calm, untouchable, always one step ahead of everyone who tried to read him. But Elena had learned how to read the spaces between his actions, the pauses in his voice, the patterns he thought were invisible. Her phone vibrated on the table. A message. From him. Short, controlled, predictable. Don't come to the office today. Elena stared at it for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, not because she was happy, but because she understood something deeper. Control wasn't about being present. It was about deciding who wasn't allowed to be. And Damien had just confirmed that she mattered enough to be excluded. By noon, she was already outside anyway. The city during daytime felt different from the night before, harsher, sharper, stripped of emotion. The skyscraper that housed Cole Enterprises stood like a blade against the sky, its glass exterior reflecting ambition instead of light. Inside, everything was quiet in a way that felt intentional, like even sound had rules here. Elena walked through the lobby without hesitation, her presence drawing brief glances from employees who recognized her but never quite understood her place in Damien's world. Some looked at her like she belonged there. Others looked at her like she didn't belong anywhere near it. She didn't care, because she wasn't here to ask permission. She was here to observe, and more importantly, to confirm what she already suspected. Damien was hiding something. She reached the private elevator, access restricted, keycard required, and paused for only a second before slipping inside behind a group of executives who assumed she was authorized. No one stopped her. No one questioned her. That was the advantage of being underestimated. The world opens doors for you without realizing it is doing so. On the top floor, the air changed. Everything was quieter, more controlled, almost sacred in its precision. Through the glass walls of a corridor, she could see Damien in a meeting room, seated at the head of a long table, surrounded by men in expensive suits. He looked exactly as he always did in these rooms, calm, unreadable, in control. But Elena noticed something different this time. A slight tension in his jaw, a fraction of hesitation in the way he flipped through documents. Something small but real. And Elena knew small things were where truth lived. A woman stood beside him, tall, professional, confident, handing him a file. She leaned slightly closer than necessary. Damien didn't react, but he also didn't move away. That alone was enough. Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not jealousy exactly, but recognition. Not a betrayal, not yet, but of possibility. And possibility, in Elena's world, was more dangerous than reality. She stepped back before anyone could notice her, her mind already calculating, already building connections. The woman's name, the timing of the meeting, the merger Damien had brushed off the night before. Everything began aligning like pieces of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered. By the time she left the building, the sky had turned pale gray again. And Elena Carter was no longer guessing. She was preparing, because now she knew something Damien didn't. He thought she was still inside the boundaries he had set for her, but Elena had already crossed them, and she was just getting started. The discovery didn't come like a dramatic explosion. It came like a whisper that slowly turned into a scream inside Elena's mind. For 2 days after visiting Cole Enterprises, she moved through her life normally on the surface, answering messages, attending meetings she didn't care about, smiling when required, but inside her thoughts were no longer her own. Every detail she had seen kept replaying, the woman standing too close to Damien, the way he didn't move away, the file exchange with silent familiarity, the meeting that felt rehearsed rather than real. And what disturbed her most was not what she had seen, but how easily it all fit together, like a truth that had been waiting for her attention all along. Elena had a habit that she never admitted to anyone. When she felt something slipping out of control, she didn't step back, she went deeper. That night, instead of resting, she sat in her dim apartment with all the lights off except for the soft glow of her laptop, searching every trace of Damien Cole's professional world. Company records, old interviews, financial shifts, merger histories. She read everything like a woman trying to decode a language designed specifically to hide itself. And slowly, patterns began to form. Cole Enterprises had expanded aggressively over the past year, but not cleanly. There were gaps in timelines, subsidiaries that appeared and disappeared under different names, and one particular offshore account structure that didn't match standard corporate behavior. But what caught her attention wasn't just the business irregularities. It was a name that kept appearing in hidden corners of legal filings and secondary reports. Aria Vance, the same woman she had seen beside Damien. At first, Elena told herself it meant nothing. Business partnerships were normal. High-level executives worked closely with many people. But something about the consistency of Aria's presence made her uneasy. She wasn't just involved, she was embedded. Every major financial move tied back to her approval, her consultation, her presence in strategic decisions that should have belonged solely to Damien. And yet no public announcement, no media mention, no formal introduction existed anywhere. It was as if she existed in a parallel layer of Damien's life, one that was never meant to be visible. Elena leaned back in her chair, her reflection faint in the dark screen, her thoughts tightening into something sharper. That was the first crack. The second came when she checked Damien's personal schedule through a small vulnerability she had noticed in his assistant's shared calendar system, a detail most people would never think twice about. It wasn't hacking in the dramatic sense. It was observation turned into precision. And what she found made her stomach tighten. A private dinner reservation. Not in a corporate venue. Not with investors. But under Damien's personal name and Aria Vance's. The date was 2 days ago. The same night, he told her not to come to the office. Elena didn't move for a long time after that. The apartment felt colder, though nothing had changed in temperature. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant signals from a world that no longer felt aligned with her reality. She stared at the screen until the names blurred slightly, not because she was crying, but because something inside her was shifting, something heavier than emotion, something closer to decision. When Damien called her later that night, she answered on the first ring. His voice was calm, controlled as always. "You've been quiet," he said. Elena looked out the window. "Have I?" A pause. "You didn't come by the office." "I was busy," she replied softly. Another pause, this one longer. He didn't like unpredictability, especially from her. "What's wrong?" he asked finally. And for a brief second, Elena almost told him everything she knew. Almost let the truth spill out like a test to see how he would react. But instead, she chose silence. Because she needed more than truth. She needed confirmation. "Nothing," she said. "Just thinking. About." She smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. About how people build things they think are permanent. That made him silent. Not confused. Not curious. Alert. Elena could feel it even through the phone, the shift in his attention, the way his mind recalibrated around her words. "Don't start overthinking things," he said carefully. That sentence confirmed everything she needed. Because people only say that when there is something to hide. After the call ended, Elena sat in complete silence, the phone still warm in her hand. And for the first time, she didn't feel confused about Damien Cole. She felt awake. The empire he built wasn't just business. It was layered, protected, shared, and she was not at the center of it. She was outside it. But what Damien didn't understand, what he had never understood, was that Elena never accepted outside positions in anyone's life. She stood up slowly, walking toward the mirror in the hallway. Her reflection looked different tonight. Not broken, not emotional. Something sharper was forming behind her eyes, something patient and dangerous. "I see you now," she whispered to herself. Not to Damien, not to Arya, to the truth itself. And somewhere in the distance, the city kept moving, unaware that a woman who was once simply waiting had just started preparing the end of someone else's control. Because now Elena didn't want love anymore. She wanted answers, and answers always demanded consequences. The moment Elena decided to dig deeper, everything around her started feeling different. Not because the world had changed, but because she finally began seeing it without filters. The same streets she walked every day now felt unfamiliar, like they were hiding something beneath their ordinary rhythm. Even the sound of her own apartment, the ticking clock, the distant traffic, the soft hum of electricity, felt louder, more intentional, as if silence itself was refusing to support her ignorance anymore. She no longer slept properly, not because she was sad, but because her mind refused to stop connecting dots that were never meant to be seen together. Arya Vance wasn't just a name anymore. She was a system, a pattern, a hidden structure inside Damien Cole's world that Elena had only recently discovered existed. And now she needed to understand why. The breakthrough came late at night, when Elena accessed archived corporate filings through a legal database most people never bothered to explore. It took hours of tracing indirect references, but eventually, she found it, a subsidiary project that had been quietly dissolved from public records 2 years ago. Officially, it was listed as a failed international expansion attempt. Unofficially, it had been a private investment structure under a different operational identity. And at the center of it all, Arya Vance. But what made Elena freeze wasn't just her name. It was Damien's signature. Not metaphorically, literally. Multiple documents, multiple approvals, multiple layers of legal authority tied directly to him, but not the Damien Cole the world knew. A different version of him. A version that operated in silence. A version that never appeared in public headlines or interviews. Elena leaned back slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. The apartment was dark again, but this time she didn't turn the lights on. She didn't need them. Her mind was already illuminating everything too clearly. This wasn't just business. This was something deeper, something structured, something personal. And then she saw it, buried in a classified transaction summary. A joint trust agreement between Damien Cole and Arya Vance, dated 5 years ago, before Elena ever entered his life. Her breath didn't stop, but something inside her did. 5 years. That meant Arya wasn't the other woman in the way Elena had assumed. She was something older, something foundational, something that existed before Elena had ever been chosen or even considered. The realization didn't come with tears. It came with stillness, the kind of stillness that feels like falling from a height without knowing when impact will come. Elena closed the laptop slowly, as if touching it too hard would make the truth louder. The next morning, she went to find answers in person. Not at Damien's office, but somewhere older, somewhere quieter. A private financial registry office located in a restricted business district of a city, a place where records of elite trusts, offshore structures, and confidential partnerships were stored behind layers of legal barriers. The building itself felt like it didn't belong in the modern world. Thick stone walls, tinted glass, silent corridors, and staff who spoke only when necessary. Everything about it discouraged curiosity. But Elena had never been easily discouraged. Using carefully constructed credentials and a calm, controlled presence that made people underestimate her instantly, she gained access to a restricted viewing room. The kind of place where truth wasn't just hidden, it was archived and locked away under the assumption that no one would ever think to look. A clerk brought her a sealed file. "Authorized access only," he said flatly. Elena nodded without emotion. When she opened it, the world she thought she understood collapsed in layers. The file contained something called the Cole-Vance Foundational Agreement. It wasn't just a partnership. It was ownership structure, equity distribution, legacy clauses, control rights, and at the very bottom of the document, a line that made everything else meaningless. In the event of personal restructuring or public transition, full operational control of Cole Enterprises may transfer to Arya Vance under pre-established fiduciary conditions. Elena stared at it for a long time, reading it again and again, until the words stopped being words and became reality. Damien Cole wasn't just running his empire. He was sharing it, or worse. He had already built a future where he might not even keep it. And Arya Vance wasn't competing with Elena for love. She was positioned for something far larger. Legacy, power, inheritance of control. Elena closed the file slowly, her hands steady in a way that didn't match the storm inside her. When she left the building, the sunlight felt too sharp against her skin. The world outside continued normally, cars moving, people talking, life pretending nothing had shifted. But for Elena, everything had already changed. Because now she understood the final truth forming beneath all the lies. She was never part of Damien's foundation. She was part of his distraction. A beautifully constructed illusion that kept her close enough to believe she mattered, but never close enough to touch what was real. And somewhere inside that realization, something in Elena stopped being passive. She no longer wanted to observe. She no longer wanted to confirm. She wanted to respond. Because people like Damien Cole didn't fear love. They feared exposure. And Elena had just found the blueprint of his entire world. Now she just had to decide how to tear it apart. The night before everything collapsed, Elena didn't sleep at all. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, staring at the city lights that flickered like distant truths she no longer trusted. Every detail she had uncovered about Damien, Arya Vance, and Cole Enterprises had stopped feeling like separate pieces of information. Now they felt like one complete machine, carefully built over years, designed to function without ever revealing its full structure to anyone outside it. And Elena had finally seen inside it. That was the difference now. She wasn't guessing anymore. She wasn't doubting. She knew exactly where she stood in Damien Cole's world, and more importantly, where she never stood. By morning, her calm had turned into something sharper, not anger in the loud sense, but clarity so intense it felt like silence. She dressed simply, almost deliberately understated, as if she was erasing the version of herself Damien had once known. No attempt to impress. No attempt to be seen the way she used to want to be seen. Because today was not about being noticed. It was about being final. Cole Enterprises was already awake when she arrived, but this time she didn't enter like a shadow slipping through cracks. She entered through the front, visible, intentional, undeniable. The lobby staff looked at her differently now, sensing something unfamiliar in her presence. Not confidence alone, but conclusion. The kind of presence that doesn't ask questions because it already has answers. On the top floor, Damien was in his office. And Arya Vance was there too. That was all Elena needed to know. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She walked through the corridor with steady steps, the sound of her heels echoing softly against glass and steel, each step marking the end of something she had once mistaken for love. When she reached the open office door, she stopped. For a moment, she just looked. Damien stood near the window, phone in hand, speaking in low tones. Arya stood beside the desk, reviewing documents, her presence calm, composed, not threatening in appearance, but structured in authority. There was no visible tension between them. No secrecy. No guilt. Just familiarity. The kind that doesn't need explanation. Damien noticed Elena first. His voice stopped mid-sentence. The room shifted instantly, not dramatically, but precisely, like a system detecting an unexpected variable. "Elena!" he said slowly. Arya turned her head slightly, observing her without surprise, as if she had already predicted this moment long before it arrived. Elena didn't look at Arya first. She looked at Damien, and for the first time, there was no softness in her eyes. No waiting. No hope. Only understanding. "I finally understand," Elena said quietly. Damien frowned slightly. "Understand what?" Elena stepped inside the room. Not closer to him, but further into the truth. "I understand what I was to you," she said. A silence followed. Heavy, controlled, unavoidable. Damien lowered his phone completely now. "That's not how it is." Elena almost smiled at that, because that was exactly how it was, just not how he preferred to define it. Arya finally spoke, her voice calm but sharp in its simplicity. "You were never part of the structure." That sentence didn't insult Elena. It confirmed her. Damien shot a glance at Arya, not anger but restraint, as if there were rules in this conversation that Elena was never supposed to hear. But it was too late for rules. Elena nodded slowly. "No," she said. "I wasn't part of your structure." Then she looked directly at Damien. "I was your illusion." The air changed. Not loudly, but permanently. Damien's expression tightened, not in denial, but in recognition that something irreversible was now unfolding. "Elena, listen to me," he began. But she interrupted him softly. "No," she said. "You listen." She took a step closer now, not toward him emotionally, but toward the center of everything he had built. "I thought I was fighting for you," she said. "But I wasn't fighting for a man. I was standing outside a system I was never invited into." Her voice stayed steady, but something inside her had already crossed a point of no return. "You didn't betray me," she continued, "because I was never yours to begin with." That was the truth she had finally accepted. And acceptance is more dangerous than anger, because anger reacts. Acceptance ends things. Damien looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable behind his eyes now. Not control, not dominance, but realization that she was no longer inside his reach. "Elena," he said again, quieter this time. But she shook her head. "I don't want explanations," she said. "I don't want closure. I don't want the version of truth you think I can handle." She paused, then delivered the final line like a verdict. "I want consequences." A silence followed that felt absolute. Arya finally closed the file she was holding, as if the conversation no longer required her input. Because from her perspective, it was already over. Damien stepped forward slightly, but Elena stepped back. Not in fear, in departure. "You build your world on control," she said softly. "And I learned something from it." She looked at both of them, not as rivals, not as enemies, but as parts of a system she was finally walking out of. Control only works when someone agrees to stay inside it. Then she turned and walked away. No dramatic exit, no breakdown, no final glance back. Just footsteps moving away from everything she once thought she needed. Behind her, Damien didn't follow, because for the first time in his life, he understood something he had never calculated before. Elena was no longer part of his equation. And outside the glass walls of coal enterprises, the city kept moving, unaware that inside one of its tallest towers, a silent empire had just cracked in a place no one could repair. But the real ending wasn't Damien's loss. It was Elena's transformation. Because she didn't leave broken. She left awake. And people who wake up from illusions never return the same.